Keen to push amendments in the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act 1971, the Health Ministry has proposed to allow abortion for unmarried women in case of contraceptive failure. But lawyers view this as more of a propaganda rather than a progressive reform.
In my view, in the 1971 Act, there was no such embargo that it was only a single woman or a married woman or a particular kind of woman who can go and get an abortion before 12 weeks. So I don't really think that this proposal for this amendment really makes sense in a legal sort of a way. Of course, as far as the awareness is concerned, as far as the feminist propaganda is concerned, definitely that would have some meaning. But as far as the legal concept is concerned, I don't think this particular amendment was really required.
Some women's rights activists feel that these draft amendments should have been incorporated into the Act earlier, as this could have saved many women from mental and physical anguish.
Unfortunately, it has taken almost like more than a half century for the government of India to realize that, woman, whether she's married, whether she's single, whether she's, a widow, she has her right to her body, and she can obviously choose whom to have a sexual relationship with, or whether to have a child or not to have a child. The hospitals, the private nursing homes, there are so many questions which are raised on the morality of the woman, first of all, whether how morally correct the woman is if she is coming out for such things, which obviously leads to a lot, and it led to a lot of health hazards otherwise.
However, this will bring a lot of relief to single women who want to legally terminate pregnancy, as opposed to the current provisions which do not permit abortion solely on the request of a woman. Despite the Act and its provisions, an estimated 60% of abortions performed in India are unsafe. And not just this, a woman dies every 2 hours because of an abortion gone wrong. And evidently, there are conflicting cases when it comes to aborting the fetus beyond the 20-week period. And there is also an issue of a woman's right to her body, as it is limited under the current laws. Jessica Taneja for WION in New Delhi.
To get more perspective on this story, we're going to women's rights activist Ranjana Kumari. She is also the Director of Social Research in India. Thanks so much for joining us to discuss this story. Let's first get some perspective with you. A long overdue reform. What are your thoughts on this, and what do we expect coming out of it?
Well, I think it's a very welcome move. In fact, we already had a law which did not prevent any women going for an abortion, but of course it had to be under the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, where doctor will recommend if it is a threat to life of a woman or a life for the child, and then the women can go. But however, this was very broadly used, and a lot of women could use it to go and have the abortions. And also almost it gave a natural right to abortion to women. But I think specifying that single women can go and have it is very good for a society where it is very, they're stigmatized, and always they have to go through all kinds of secret hidden methods. And as a result, in most of the time, it will cost their life, because they will go to quacks, they will go to not such, to proper hospitals. And also, so I think also it also is giving a strong coverage and strong belief that women have fundamental right to their body, they have right over their body, and this is a fundamental principle of empowerment of women. So we recently had a judgment where a pregnant girl had to go through the whole pregnancy and have the child after being raped. So in those kind of eventualities, such a law is definitely going to be very helpful. It is important that we as a society in India recognize that women have right over their body, and there is nothing like, in the name of morality, in the name of all kinds of, issues about single women getting pregnant or having sex, putting women into a stigma, and also ostracizing them, and also pushing them to go for all kinds of illegal methods and illegal, not so expert doctors. So it's really good. We really welcome it. We have been saying it for a long time, and now that it has been legislated, definitely it is a good news.
And Ranjana, staying with you, what was the need for the law in the first place? Why now, and why important is that for women in India?
The law which does not specify any age and any nature of women who can go, for example, the women who are married or not married, or single woman, it's not been specified, but as society presumes that a woman can get pregnant and has sex only in marriage. In India, it's extremely difficult for anybody to imagine that women are going and having sex outside or before marriage. Those are not something which really is accepted very normally, even though it is happening in a big scale. It is happening with all the young generation, and also you can't prevent men and girls and boys from having all kinds of experiments and relationships. So in that case, if contraceptive fails, if issues are of danger to her life, she should be allowed to go and have an abortion.
Ranjana, I'm going to have you hold on for just a moment. We're going to bring in our correspondent, Jessica Tanej, has also been following the story. So we're going to kind of talk to both of you guys, get perspective. Jessica, thanks so much for joining us. What is next at this point in terms of this move? Where do we see it going forward?
Well, Archit, this still has to be passed in the Parliament Houses to be considered. These are just recommendations, remember, to the amendments that need to be made in the MTP Act of 1971. However, there are a lot of details that need to be taken care of very carefully, especially when we're talking about unmarried and single women. And we're talking about a period of 20 weeks to 24 weeks. That just does not guarantee a lot of, that does not guarantee rights to a lot of women who are hoping that this would bring about a significant change, because this, remember, is a pressing issue. It's not just about unmarried or single women. We'll have to look at a lot of other women who are suffering, especially the sex workers or other marginalized society, women living in the marginalized societies who would need help when it comes to such grave issues. We need to see that this going forward in a very reformatory way.
Now, I know you also were out in the streets and talking to people about this. What was the word on the street about that? Did we get any kind of a consensus, one way or the other? Were there people supporting it and those who were saying this is just it's not really going to do any benefit for women?
Well, it would do a lot of benefit for women, but if all the amendments are considered in a way that, yes, this does guarantee them a right to their body, remember, it should circle or should be centered around the fact that women has a right to her body. And apart from the debates that have been going on around this issue for a while, we would expect, that this would be taken, since it took them quarter of a century to actually speak about unmarried and single women. Earlier,
Right.
The focus was just on married women, remember, and there were a lot of women who would suffer and wouldn't be able to voice their, problems directly to the practitioners or the doctors, but rather would have to go knock the court's doors for an issue like this, which obviously they would feel, pressurized both mentally and physically to do. So a lot of women do think that this would change, but they think that there has to be some sort of education also around this, and a holistic program to educate people. Yes, this is okay, and things can be progressed from there.
Let's pick up that question now with Ranjana Kumari. Thanks again for staying on with us. Let's go into that the topic Jessica just mentioned about education and sort of really teaching people about sex education. What needs to be done at this point, especially in India, to get more awareness about these kind of issues? It's still a very taboo topic.
Well, this is one thing that this kind of amendment is also going to serve as really awareness generation in society, because now the awareness has to be an acceptability for relationships that young people engage in. And if the girl gets pregnant and she's not married, she is young, then she has a right to go for an abortion. And that, of course, is very shocking initially for the Indian society to accept, especially the conservative society, to accept this kind of that girls will go for and will encourage girls to go for sexual relations and may get pregnant. But that's fact of life, and so that awareness has to come along with this law and educate youngsters in school. You know how much debate we have about sex education in the school, but still we do not have a proper curriculum at the early stages where children are given a proper sex education. So that also opens that debate that, let's start that so that the girls and boys will be aware of what are the consequences of going for any kind of sexual relationship. And secondly, also that, it will save a lot of youngsters who may have, because of all kinds of, as the law itself says, contraceptive failure, if they become pregnant, then they need not go and hush and go to quacks for abortion. They can go legally to a proper clinic for an abortion. And in that sense, that also saves a lot of lives, which we are losing because of this kind of a mindset. And thirdly, it is very important to understand, in the context of the right over the women's body, that it's not just that, Indian society does not give the permission, or Indian society does not accept the relationships, but it has to eventually understand that a girl has a right to decide over her body. She can think of, having a baby or not having a baby. We have cultures in our own country where girls can have baby without marriage. And for example, in many tribal areas, we know that the girls can have babies and later they can get married. So they can choose whether they want to have the baby, they don't want to have the baby. That is their own choice. But that choice has to be given, and that access they must get legally. And this law precisely does that. That gives you legal access to, going for taking such a decision. So in a way, it is empowering.
Right,
for,
right.
youngsters, yeah.
Well, staying on the subject, it's still in draft mode at this point. Can there be certain changes be made to that law at this point?
Sorry, I didn't get your question.
I said it's still in a draft, draft mode at this point. Can there be other amendments or changes still added to it?
Well, it's very important, along with this law, this change that we are giving, we have to bring in this whole issue of education and sex education. It is extremely important.
Right.
Because, that awareness has to be there, because otherwise, it can also run into, a lot of girls can run into dangerous situations without knowing, without, understanding the consequences. It's better to be very open. We are quite, the subject is sex and sexuality is very taboo subject in our country. We need to be open about it. It's a very normal human desire. It's very normal human, activity. So why should we be so, under the carpet, kind of quiet about it and not really let children know, especially rural areas? It's very, very, India is not just urban, handful of people living in urban areas and educated, but we have large masses of people who live in rural areas, live under all kinds of superstition, all kinds of taboos, all kinds of, wrong understanding. So it's better that we bring in the educational part along with this change.
Sure. I'm going to have you hold on for just a moment there. I'm going to bring in Jessica back in. Jessica, what does this law not allow? We've talked about what amendments could be made. What provisions are not accounted for?
Well, two very important things, actually. It does not, allow women's right to pregnancy beyond 20 weeks. But we're expecting it should be in approximately 24 weeks. But that is important. And another significant point is that it does not give the right to a woman solely to decide whether she wants to get an abortion done or not. I spoke to a doctor today, a gynecologist specifically, and then she told me that there is a consent form that they have to fill, and a lot of women are not very comfortable filling. Of course, they would want to, the hospitals and the maternity clinics do want to fulfill that clause legally, but a lot of women do not want to mention the name of the father.
Why
or
is that?
whoever.
Just privacy concerns? Or?
Privacy concerns,
right.
Of course, and a lot of people, a lot of women are concerned about, their privacy, of course, that they're scared that this should not be used against them in the future. That is the primary fear.
And a social stigma, perhaps.
Perhaps, yes, and that does add to a lot of, mental health issues for them, perhaps. But I think this is something very important that needs to be considered. It solely should be, a right of a woman. It should only, a woman should be able to request for it. She does not need assistance, or she does not need to, sign 1,000 forms, and that's what potentially scares her in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Ranjana, let me get your perspective on that as well, about privacy here in India, and all the legal, the paperwork and all of that. How easy is that, and should more needs to be done to protect women who do go for abortions, especially when we compare to other countries?
When we are walking a few steps by taking this kind of amendment and making a more progressive law, because we do understand that MTP is there, but MTP is definitely not a law which really allows, people are using it very freely, but then that's not where you can go for an abortion without recommendation of a doctor. And secondly, also talk about the person involved, that is the man involved in. So you do have to fill that kind of form. I don't think it is necessary, and I don't think that this kind of, binding should be there on the girls to talk about who the person is. Because, also this stigma, the stigmatizing a girl, and then also later part of her life, she has to suffer for all these kind of, issues. So I think let that be her own right, and that be her own decision. And also doctors will have then a more freedom to do it, because at the moment doctors also do not want this to be shared. They don't want to, because they are not doing it as MTP, they are not doing it as medical termination, they are doing it termination of pregnancy, that is abortion. And that is why the recommendation is not there of the doctors. It's not really a medical reason why so many girls or women go for abortion. It's just that they choose not to have that baby. So it's important to understand the difference between the two, and when we are taking a progressive stand, we should go all the way, and we should, in this law, ensure that it does not really restrict girls.
And Ranjana, what about, can you bring our viewers up to speed about how things have, perhaps changed, both from a legal perspective, if any, and even from a social stigma perspective over the last several years in India?
Well, while I was saying all this, also a note of caution to the girls, because any kind of abortion costs a lot of health issues and mental health issues. It costs a lot of health issues. So girls should also be very, very aware of, when they engage in relationship, they should know that it is going to harm them and their body and their health only. So that caution should be also there for a lot of, so that's why education is very important part of this whole legislation that we are changing.
Sure. I'm going to bring in Jessica back in as well to the conversation. Jessica, women face lots of different pressures, different roles to play over the years, as someone who's also grown up not just in India but also abroad. What type of issues are women facing, and why do things like this become more and more complicated, where the law does need to step up and sort of protect their rights? What type of pressures have you heard or faced?
Well, according to the reports I've read and the cases that I've come across, while of course reading, a lot of reasons being cited, for women actually feeling perturbed rather than disturbed, as a fact that what would they do? A, there is no education, there is not much information in India, or as a matter of fact, not easily available, I'd say, for a lot of women who want to know what are the repercussions in the future, what should have been done, not a lot of knowledge about the body and its functionalities, of course. We're talking both, the marginalized sections of the society as well as the, upper middle class. But a lot of women, would first want to ask, as I spoke to the gynecologist earlier in the day, just to get a bit of a perspective as to what these patients go through in particular. And she does mention, they're so disturbed, they're depressed mostly, without even knowing that, yes, this could be tackled. There wouldn't be a problem. This can be taken care of easily. But the kind of pressures a society and, a patriarchal society perhaps like ours would not be able to, would actually suffocate them with thoughts like, what have you done? This is morally wrong. This shouldn't have taken place in the first place.
In other countries, maybe it's not judged upon as it is here because of the social pressure.
Perhaps, but yes, here, if you're not married, if you're not, bonded in a relationship, of course, this is a sin, so to say. It obviously relates to a lot of different issues. But yes, a lot of women do feel that way. Is this right? Oh my God, what have I done? Is the first thought that comes to their mind. And as a matter of fact, I just quote what the gynecologist said. She says that they come to me with such a fear, they're almost crying. So I think we need to educate people, rather educate the educator first, and then sort of talk about a holistic program where, these issues can be tackled well. Right,
Ranjana, let me get your thoughts on that, real quick, to talk about, in terms of in India, especially when comparing to other countries, how difficult is it, for a woman to go ahead and have an abortion, no matter what level or what part of society she is, whether it's in an urban city, in more of the villages, whether she's married, whether she's single. Just bring us up to speed on the comparisons perhaps here versus in other countries.
Well, first of all, access to safe abortion is a huge issue in India, and that is why people go through all kinds of self-medication and all kinds of indigenous methods of abortion, and which is extremely dangerous, and in quite a few cases women lose their life because of that. So safe and access to safe abortion, when you are legislating this, then there has to be access to safe abortion. Secondly, very important part of it is the religious notions about abortion, because a lot of religions do not allow. As a result, you don't have this right in the US even till date. We're talking about Indian society, and we should talk about more developed countries because of religious restrictions. Irish, so many, I can name many countries where it is absolutely no for any kind of abortion. So those things, and also in the context where we have all these personal laws, which are really customary practice, codified in terms of personal laws, a lot of religious interference is there in women's lives. So those are also nuances that we have to look into. Other than, of course, getting better medical facility, good counseling, good education, and also giving the access to and also right over women's own bodies, and accepting is in principle. These are the that also is a very difficult proposition at the moment. But I'm sure as we progress and as such legislations come, we will have better response, and we will of course grow as a society. I'm sure. From there, I started on women's rights issues till now. There has been a lot of changes that we are witnessing already. So I'm sure things will change accordingly.
All right, we appreciate your input. Thank you so much to both our correspondent Jessica Taneja as well as activist Ranjana Kumari on this topic. We're going to take a short break, continue the conversation right after this. Stay with us here on WION.